Hi, everybody. Welcome back to history class. So, we were talking about ancient Greece, and the last time we were together, we discussed a lot about the Persian Wars and Athens and Sparta fighting in the Persian Wars. What happens after the Persian Wars? Well, if you remember, the Delian League had been set up, and the Athenians had taken a lot of money from the Delian League in order to rebuild their city. This causes the golden age of Athens. Here's your first blank in chapter 5, section 3. Athens went through a golden age right after the end of the Persian Wars. They were at peace, they were powerful, and they were very wealthy. They had a smart leader named Pericles. Pericles is one of the most famous leaders of the ancient world. Pericles was their leader for most of the Athenian Golden Age. He made sure that poor people could afford to work for the city of Athens by making sure that anybody who worked for the city got a salary. Up to this point, city employees were volunteers, which meant the only people who could afford to work in the government were rich and powerful people. But there were a lot of talented poor people who were left out of that. And so with Pericles starting to pay people a salary to work for the government, that meant that poorer people who were smart and talented could still rise to the top. During his time in charge, Athens became what's called a direct democracy. A direct democracy is different than what we have today. In a direct democracy, all the laws get voted on by all of the citizens. Now, we don't do that. Every time the U.S. passes a new law, we don't all go and vote about it because that would take forever and nothing would ever get done. We're such a big country, we have so many millions, hundreds of millions of citizens that we can't really just have an election every time we want to change a law. So instead, we live in a republic, a democratically elected republic. What that means is we have representatives. That's the republic part. We have representatives and senators. We democratically vote for whoever they are, and they get to be the ones to make the decisions about all the new laws. So we live in a democratic republic. In ancient Athens, they lived in a direct democracy, which meant that, now remember, in order to be a citizen in Athens, you had to be born there, you had to be male, you had to own your own property, and you had to be an adult. So really, in a city of maybe 30 or 40,000 people, which probably is what Athens was, you're talking about maybe 1,000 citizens. So yeah, you can have 1,000 citizens go vote every time you want to change a law. That would work. 1,000 citizens can get together once every couple of weeks and vote on new laws. But in America, we couldn't really do that. We have hundreds of millions of citizens spread out over a massive country. They were a city. So, we in the U.S. are not a direct democracy. As I said, we're a democratic republic. Pericles gave a lot of public speeches. You'd expect the leader of the city to give public speeches. His speeches were often written down, and a lot of the time Pericles' speeches became famous for their description of what Athens was and what it stood for and what he was fighting for. As you can imagine, though, not everybody loved the city of Athens, especially their traditional enemy, Sparta. The leaders in Sparta at this time decided that having a Delian League was not good, and that they would need to start a league of their own in order to fight back against the Delian League if it ever came to blows, came to punches. And so they started a league named after the peninsula that Sparta is on, the Peloponnesus. And so this became known as the Peloponnesian League. The Peloponnesian League is the group that Sparta starts to fight back, at first just in a Cold War, no actual violence, but posturing, like chest to chest, right? So the Peloponnesian League versus the Delian League. What did Pericles spend all that money on? Pericles spent a huge amount of money on rebuilding Athens, decorating the city, far bigger and better than it ever had been before. This is the time when the biggest Greek temple ever got built, the Parthenon. The Parthenon. The Parthenon is magnificent. Okay, a normal Greek temple is 6 columns wide and 12 columns deep. But the Parthenon was built to be bigger and grander than any ever before. And so it was 2 more columns wider. It was 8 columns wide and 16 deep. It was so long that they actually had to design it not as a perfectly flat floor, but as a curved floor in order to fight against the curvature of the building on the surface of the earth. It actually would appear curved unless they designed it so that it fought against the curve a little bit. So it was built and designed with all those kept in mind, so that it would still appear perfectly flat, perfectly straight in every way. The Parthenon is on the highest point of the city of Athens, and we know that the highest point of a Greek city is called its Acropolis, the high point of the city, Acropolis. So the Acropolis had several temples on it, and it also served, the Parthenon itself served as a treasury building. It had a massive amount of cash kept in it, so that if the city was invaded and the citizens all came up to the Parthenon, they would still be able to have a source of funds. So a fortress around the Acropolis on the top of it, plus the Parthenon, plus the Erechtheion, another temple that's up there, and a couple other buildings. Really remarkable spot. The temple was bigger. It housed a giant statue of the goddess that the city is named for. Hopefully you remember the city is named for Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom. The temple was built under the command of a sculptor named Phidias. Phidias is responsible for the architecture and the sculpture of the Parthenon. He made a lot of beautiful statues, perfect human bodies, very calm expressions. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous artifacts from ancient Greece is some sculpture that was on the inside wall of the temple of the Parthenon. And the marble, the statue, is called the Elgin marbles. It was there on the Parthenon until the Turks invaded and controlled the city of Athens. And the British came, and they were like, hey, wow, this temple's really cool. One of the British leaders, Lord Elgin, the ambassador to the Turkish Empire, said, hey, would it be cool with you if I paid you for the statues that go along the walls here and then bring them back to England? And the Turks were like, yeah, hand over the cash. You can take them. So Lord Elgin bought a lot of the decorative statues and friezes. A frieze is a statue that's kind of half into a wall. It bulges out. So Lord Elgin bought the Elgin marbles. Not marbles like that you'd play with, but marble statues. And brought them back to Scotland, where he kept them himself personally for a little while. And then he realized that that wasn't really going to work out too well, so he sold them to the British government. And the Elgin marbles, a huge, important part of the decoration of the Parthenon, it's still in London. And the Greeks want it back. And the British are like, but we bought it fair and square. And the Greeks are like, but it's ancient Greek, give it back. So there's still a fight today about the Elgin marbles. Should the British give it back? Athenians also the art of this period, the golden age of Athens, is called classical art. Classical art. Athenians also focused on another kind of art, this one a performing art, drama, great Greek plays. Tragedies focused on the life of a hero who would eventually be brought down by a tragic flaw. There were 3 really famous tragedy playwrights. Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles, Sophocles. He wrote the most famous Greek tragedy of all, still learned by freshmen all over the country and all over the world, Oedipus Rex, Oedipus, capital Rex. Rex means king, and so the play is called King Oedipus. The Greeks also had comedies, and their most famous writer of Greek comedy was Aristophanes. Greeks also wrote about history. The first real Greek history book was the Persian Wars, written by Herodotus. But, it's still got a lot of the gods in it and that kind of thing, so it's not a perfect history book. The greatest Greek historian was Thucydides, who said that if you can understand the past, you can actually understand the future and even predict it, because history repeats. Now, I didn't prepare very well for this lecture, but I have some Greek plays just around the edge of the laptop, so I'm going to get those. There we go. Hi, I'm back. All right, so I have Euripides' play, The Trojan Women, a collection of Sophocles plays, including Oedipus the King, Oedipus at Colonus, Antigone, so some good stuff there. I have Aeschylus, Part 1, which has Orestia, Agamemnon, the libation bearers, and the Eumenides. And I also have Euripides, Volume 5, Euripides, Electra, the Phoenician women, and the Bacchae. So lots of good Greek stuff here. And those were all 50 cents a book at Bull Moose. So go figure. If you want some ancient Greek tragedy, maybe even some ancient Greek comedy, pretty sure you can find some cheap. Good luck. Okay. What happens in the end with Greece? Why don't we today still have ancient Greece as a civilization? Why did they die out? Why do we look at them only as part of the classical world and not as part of the modern world? Well, because they fought another war, and this one was the ultimate war. Athens and Sparta had been competitive with each other. It made each one of them stronger and better. This competition was healthy for a while. It certainly wasn't friendly competition, but they did join each other to fight against the Persians when the Persians invaded. Eventually, though, these two enemies are going to have the knockout, drag-out fight that just wrecks it all. Athens and Sparta kept getting bigger and bigger and more arrogant since Greece was split into two big alliances, the Delian League and the Peloponnesian League. The Athenians call the war that started in 431 the Peloponnesian War, because it's the war of us versus the people from the Peloponnesus. Now, who lived on the Peloponnesus? Do you remember? That's right, Sparta, Athens' big enemy. Athens had the best navy in the ancient world at this point, but Sparta had probably the very best army. So the nickname for this war is the conflict of the tiger versus the shark. Obviously, neither side is going to really give the other an opportunity to beat it, if one side stays on the ocean usually, and the other one has an army on land. The Athenians knew that they'd need to protect their city if their fleet was out, and so they built a gigantic protective wall. The Athenians had a defensive wall and relied on their navy to sail all over the Mediterranean and hit Sparta on the beaches wherever they had friends and allies. So Athens kept trying to pick off Spartan friends by the sea. Athens became overcrowded when Sparta started to march towards Athens. So as the Spartan army comes closer, the Athenians and all their friends get behind the city walls. And what that meant was that the city was devastatingly overcrowded. They could still get enough food, though, because the Athenian navy would sail out, buy food, bring it back, and unload it at Athens. So they were able to feed their citizens, but they were overcrowded. One of the supply ships that came in brought more than just food. It brought the plague. So just like tourists bringing COVID-19, or supply ships bringing food that's tainted with COVID-19 maybe, in ancient Athens, they lose the Peloponnesian War because the plague ravages the city of Athens. It kills 1/3 of all the people. So if you can imagine, here in America, we have almost 400 million people today. If you can imagine about 130 million deaths from COVID-19, that's what the Athenians were suffering from. 1/3 of the population dead, including their great leader, the guy that we've been introduced to before, Pericles. The war ended in 404 BC. Athens surrendered. They had tried one last desperate attempt. They had sent out an expedition to go conquer one of Sparta's most important allies, Syracuse. And so I think actually it was, I got my S's mixed up. Sicily, on the Italian island of Sicily, the Spartans had some good allies. So the Greeks, the Athenians, sent a fleet with an expeditionary army. But the army got weighed down on the beaches. They couldn't actually get up to the city to take it. And the expedition was a massive failure. So the Athenians surrendered to Sparta. Interestingly, part of the biggest reason why the Athenians could never actually make their advantage of the navy count for more than it did was because Sparta decided not just to fight by itself, but also to bring in one of their worst traditional enemies, Persia. The Spartans invited the Persians to come help. And the Persians were like, oh yeah, we're going to help because we're going to take over after the war. So we're going to send our troops in now and our navy in now to crush Athens so that it'll be easier to crush Sparta after the war. So Sparta invites Persia to come in, and Persia helps Sparta destroy Athens. Athens had to burn most of its navy that was still left so that Persia would never feel threatened by an Athenian fleet, and Sparta was now kind of the dominant force in Greece. Let's take a look at some philosophy. The Greeks gave birth to what we call philosophy. Philo, P-H-I-L-O, like in the word Philadelphia, means love. If you're a Francophile, then that means you love French culture. If you're a Sinophile, it means you love Chinese culture. If you're an Anglophile, it means you love English culture. So phile or philos means love of. So philosophy, what's Sophie? Well, it comes from the Greek word Sophia, which isn't just a girl's name. It actually means wisdom. So philosophy means the love of wisdom. Philosophers are people who love wisdom. And just in case, I mentioned Philadelphia. That literally means the city of brotherly love. Philadelphia. So that's Greek for the city of brotherly love, and that's also the nickname for Philadelphia. In English, the city of brotherly love. Okay. The first great Greek philosopher was this guy named Socrates. Socrates was a war veteran, and he had gone to Delphi. I told you about Delphi, the oracle at Delphi that will tell your fortune for you. He went to Delphi and said, I want to know who the smartest person in the world is. And the oracle came back and told him, "You are." And he said, "That can't be right. I can't be the smartest person in the world. I don't even know anything for sure." So he decided to have a mission for the rest of his life. He was going to walk around the city of Athens, his hometown, and ask people who seemed smart how they know what they think they know. And in the end, what he found was all these people who think they're so smart just say, well, because the gods think that's the right way to do it. I do it this way because the gods want me to. I do it that way because that's the way the gods say. And Socrates said, but there's more than one god. And the gods disagree with each other. And if the gods don't even agree with each other, how do you know which one is right? And people would throw up their hands and say, "Leave me alone, old man, get out of my face." Socrates questioned so many of the city leaders and the city's wisest men that young folks decided to hang around with him and watch him because they thought it was hilarious to see the leaders of the city, their parents and grandparents, look stupid. And so Socrates got this gang of kids who came around with him, and he tried to educate them. He tried to make them wiser in terms of how to think about the world. Socrates said, if you live a life where you don't bother to examine the things you do and criticize them, if you live a life where you aren't reflective about what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it, you're no better than an animal. Your life isn't even worth living. If you're not examining your life constantly and asking, why am I doing this? How can I do it better? Then your life isn't even worth it. Not in a, hey, go kill yourself kind of way. Definitely not. But in a, hey, think about things kind of way. Use your brain. Be critical. Be a critical thinker, even of yourself. Now, the leaders of Athens had just lost a war. They lost the Peloponnesian War. They were depressed. They were cranky. They were angry. They didn't see a future. And here's this old man going around telling people, hey, don't trust your elders. Don't trust the leaders. They're actually way more stupid than you think. They weren't cool with that. So they put Socrates on trial for treason against the city of Athens. Socrates was his own lawyer in the defense, and he wasn't apologetic. He did not say, oh, I'm so sorry, just throw me a bone here. Because if he did, they would have found him innocent, probably. Instead, he said, you should be thanking me. You should totally be thanking me for the things I'm doing for you. I'm actually trying to make you better. I'm trying to help you think smarter. As a matter of fact, instead of putting me on trial, you should be giving me free dinners for the rest of my life. I should get free dinner in every restaurant in Athens for life. Well, that didn't go down very well. He was found guilty by the jury. And then they had to decide what punishment to give him. And again, he was not apologetic. And they decided he would have to kill himself. They ordered that Socrates drink hemlock sap from a hemlock tree, which is poison. It numbs you from the bottom up, I think, and you die of paralysis. Your lungs and your heart just shut down. The executioner didn't really want to have to do this. He liked Socrates, and so he actually devised a way for Socrates to escape the night before. He said, hey, I'm going to look the other way. Why don't you take off? And Socrates said, no, I love my city. I can't be anywhere but my city. And if my city has decided that it wants me dead, I have no choice. I have nowhere else I'd rather be. If Athens doesn't want me, it's time to go. So, surrounded by his students, the young men who paid the most attention to his lessons, like Plato and Aristotle, Socrates drank the hemlock, and then died. So that's the story of Socrates. There's something called the Socratic method, where you find answers just by constantly asking questions, like Socrates did to the wise men of his city. The Socratic method, named for Socrates. One of the students of Socrates, Plato, decided that because the jury had used a democratic method to vote to find Socrates guilty, and had used the democratic method to vote that he should die, that democracy is bad. And so Plato decided that instead we should have a society where people are born and then divided automatically into one of three groups. Some of the people need to be soldiers. Some of the people need to be workers. And a much smaller group need to be leaders. And so you can separate them out at a young age based on their intelligence. And then you've got workers, soldiers, and thinkers, leaders, philosopher kings. That's how Socrates said that our civilization should be organized. And he said that in his book, The Republic. So thinkers, soldiers, and workers, he wrote this in his book, The Republic. Interestingly enough, there's also one of the most famous analogies in ancient Greek philosophy, Plato's cave. Plato said, what if the reality that we can see is not true reality? What if all we can see is a tiny, little, unimportant version of reality? He said, imagine that you're a boy or a girl, and you've been raised in the dark in a cave. And the only time that you ever get to see anything is when you sit and face the wall of the cave, and there's a campfire behind you, and people are walking around in the campfire, and all you ever see is their shadows getting bigger and smaller on the wall of the cave. Plato said, you would think that reality is those shadows, that that's what human beings look like. You would think that human beings can suddenly get smaller and bigger, and that shadows have voices, and that humans are only shadows. Plato said, if we could understand more of the universe, then what we think is true now would be nothing compared to the real truth that we can find. If we can just go beyond the shadows on the wall, which is all we see now of the world around us. Find the real truths, and we can understand so much more. So, Plato. Plato had a school called the Academy. And Plato had a student named Aristotle. Aristotle was the world's first great philosophical scientist. Aristotle came up with a ton of scientific ideas to explain the world. He was the founder of biology, physics, psychology, zoology, logical arguments called syllogisms. A syllogism would be if Maine is in New England and Dan is a Mainer, Dan is also from New England. Now, try to turn it around. Is it a true syllogism if you say that all Mainers are from New England, Dan is a Mainer, and, oh, nope, I screwed that one up. Sorry, never mind. That Maine is in New England, Dan is from New England, is Dan from Maine? Well, the answer is not necessarily, because he could be from New Hampshire, he could be from Vermont, or Massachusetts, or Rhode Island, or Connecticut, right? So you can have syllogisms that work, like Dan is from Maine, Maine is in New England, Dan is from New England, and you can have ones that don't work, like Dan is from Maine, Dan is from New England. Sorry, yeah, screwed it up again. Dan is from New England. Maine is in New England. Dan is from Maine. No, not automatically, right? So, You can have false syllogisms and true syllogisms. His school was called the Lyceum. And the Lyceum trained philosophers just like him. And one of his students in the Lyceum was a guy called Alexander the Great. He wasn't called Alexander the Great at birth, or even during most of his lifetime, but he got that nickname towards the end of it, I bet. So the Lyceum. The Lyceum was where Aristotle had his school, and if you go back, Plato had the Academy, and if you go back, Socrates had his students. So you can trace a straight line from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle to Alexander the Great. Kind of cool. So that's the end of Chapter 5, Section 3. And when we come together next time, Alexander the Great is quite definitely going to be what we talk about. So, have fun till then.